morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are in the world. Welcome to the Happiness Hacking TV show and podcast, a place to inform and inspire you to live a happier and more abundant life. I'm Patricia Madalena, international best-selling author, NLP master and integration therapist, but more importantly, I'm mum to three amazing full power children who span the toddler to teenage bracket, and they teach me and they inspire me to show up every single day. Now, each week there's a brand new episode tying in the extracts of my best-selling book, The Happiness Hacker Reveals, as well as inspiring interviews from experts in their fields, all designed to support us on our mission to stay connected and present and happy in this hectic world. And if you've not yet ordered a copy of the Happiness Hackers Reveals, make sure you do. Go and grab one so you can access all of the amazing bonuses and trainings that I've created that will help you have a more happier and successful and more abundant life. And you can find more about us, about me, all over at www.transformation.tv, and remember to bounce on over to the transformation.tv Facebook page and like that so that you can stay up to date with all of our news and inspiring TV shows. So in this episode, I'm joined by my special guest, Joanne Avison. She's a mother, advanced yoga teacher and yoga therapist, and structural integration practitioner and teacher, and author of the most amazing book called Yoga, Fascia, Anatomy and Movement. And her work, she's just dedicated to helping people understand their bodies better, helping them live and breathe and move more harmoniously in life. And in this episode, we talk about a simple fun hack to hack happiness, and we discover what the facial matrix is, or the fascia is, and why it's so important to us to live a happier and harmonious life. So I'm just going to bring her on now. Excellent. So Joanne, it is so good to have you here. Welcome to the Happiness Hacking podcast. Thank you. Can say that again?
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So we're just going to dive straight in. So what is fascia? What is the fascial matrix, and why is it so important to us?
Well, fascia is the connective tissue matrix of the human body. And for centuries in anatomy, the fascia was scraped away, and it's like it has different consistencies depending on where it is in the body, but it's like it isn't like a mesh, and it is a mesh. It's completely connected. It's actually a liquid crystal, which it makes it harder even then to get your head around. But imagine an egg white around an egg. That egg white is like the fascial matrix. So if you pick the back of your hand up, the skin on the back of your hand, and you go like that, yeah. Can you feel as it glides on itself?
Yeah.
Well, what's gliding between your fingers is basically the fascia. It's called the superficial fascia. It's named for its depths. And so if you go further up here, you find that it moves slightly differently between the skin and the muscles underneath. If you go on a bony bit, it's got a kind of different quality. Mm-hmm. And then if you go into the palm of your hand, it moves differently. Okay. And basically, historically, just to give you a context, anatomists 400 years ago, for example, would open up the human body when they were allowed to do human dissection. And they would scrape away the fascia so that they could see the organs or the muscles or the important bits and pieces, as it were. And the fascia, when a body has died, goes like fluff and fuzz. And so it's like a little bit like fiberglass that you'd pack a roof out with. Yeah. It has that feeling that you can tease it open. And it isn't like that in the living body at all, but it gives that impression when there are certain types of dissection. And basically it was scraped out of the way in order to see the important parts. And what's happened over the last 40 years, a bit longer, but certainly in the last decade or two, the research and our measuring equipment that can allow us to measure things in living bodies, this fabric that was scraped away so that you could learn which muscles were attached to which bones that move us, you know, everybody knows that basically, that it actually is nothing like that in the living body at all. And I have the great privilege of being able to work in a human dissection laboratory occasionally that is soft fix. And basically what that means is those people, and we always say a prayer and thanks for them for donating their bodies to science so that this can be understood. The body is more like an anaesthetized living body, and it gives a completely different sense of this tissue. But what is now shown through research and through various protagonists around the world, from orthopedic surgeons to anatomists and so on, sorry about the background noise, my dog's suckling, is that this tissue is everywhere in the human body, everywhere. There's not a millimeter of you that doesn't have connective tissue in it. It's holding your skin to your muscles underneath. It's actually the tissues in which muscle protein exists. So we think of a muscle as a sort of a lump with a bit on each end of tendon, when in actual fact it's a continuity of fascia with bits of muscle protein in. Now, where is that relevant to us? What's so important is understanding and recognizing that this tissue actually is, the word scientifically is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And it expresses different aspects. So we felt it on the hands. It's a little harder underneath. The connective tissue in your hands a little firmer, whereas on the back of your hand it's slidier, and you can see my lovely aging wisdom lines coming in my hands. Can you see?
Yeah.
Because I work with my hands, as you know. And so they have different, it has different qualities. So the fascia within muscle is called myofascia. The fascia that's wrapping around bones is called periosteum. There's a big argument scientifically at the moment as to whether bone is fascia, but it makes perfect sense to me that it's a starched fascia. It's like fascia with, it's got mineral salts and calcium and hydroxyapatite in it. So that's hard. So suddenly, instead of seeing the body made up of all these little bits that the anatomists have cut up and named for their origin and their insertion, and this bit and that bit, as if they're all separate, we suddenly have this thing that's been hidden in the obvious, which is this fascial matrix of the entire body that is what's holding your skin to the rest of you. And it gets softer as you get older. Look, you can see how my neck, and we go, oh, my neck's going, oh, my wrinkles. But in actual fact, it's the tension in the fascia. And your whole body grows inside. I mean, if you think about it, kind of new subject, but it'll make sense in a minute. I'll join the two up. We start off as an embryo. We start off as a conceptus, as a single ball, and inside a membrane. And that ball divides into 2, then 4, then 8, then 16, and so on, till there's just over 100 of them. And by that time, it starts its process of implanting. And once it implants, it then creates the placenta and basically grows itself. We're all self-assembled, which kind of fascinates people when they hear that for the first time. But we self-assembled, if you think about it, as a kind of ballish, spherical-ish shape, full of little spheres called cells inside this, we call it embryonic soup. And everything that you are now formed from that as a whole. You never went to your surgeon while you were pregnant for the limb bolt-on procedure or the head attachment procedure or the toe attachment procedure. You produce this thing that's self-assembled in the womb through this unbelievable process of biodynamic origami and folding. And it comes out as the baby that then grows into the adult. So in actual fact, we're in a constant development. We're still developing. And we talk about the developmental stages of the embryo. And then when you start studying the fetus, and then you start studying they go from the neonate to the newborn, and you go on all through these stages of childhood, adolescence, and puberty, and right up to elderhood. You just see it as one continuity in development. And the architecture, and this is the word I want you to stick in your mind, the architecture rather than the anatomy is whole. And the one whole common denominator of that architecture is the fascia. But big, huge but. It is not inert packaging. It was thought that it was inert packaging. It isn't. It now turns out that it could possibly be the largest sensory organ of the body. Now, just have a think about that for a minute. What we're basically saying is that imagine this room, that you found out that the cement between the bricks was sensory. And then I said to you, well, hang on a minute, Patricia, let's think about sand as a substance, a building material, sand. When you treat sand in a certain way, you can make it into the basis for cement if you put other things with it. You can put it with clay and make it into the basis of the bricks. You can grind it in a certain way and heat and cool it in a certain way, and you get the glass. So you can see behind me, there's glass windows, and there's obviously bricks, and there's plaster, also a derivative. So this main building material, this fundamental building material, has all these different chemical and heat treatments so that it crystallizes or hardens in a form that we can call a house with doors and windows. Guess what? Fascia is basically that in the human body, and it can become the white of your eye. It attaches the skin to the muscles when it's soft, as you felt before. It's actually muscle fiber is fascia. The tendon is fascia, ligament is fascia, periosteum is fascia, cartilage is fascia with a lot of hyaline in it. They have different densities, they have different characteristics, just like the difference between bricks and cement and glass. Some are more brittle than others and some are softer than others, but basically it is the basis of our architecture. And we have fascia boards on houses that act as a band. And that's precisely why what band means is fascia. So the body, it's all bands, but what we discover is that those bands are essential. They are literally holding us together. And these membranes wrap everything, your stomach, your gut, your brain, your nerves are wrapped in it, your blood vessels are wrapped in it, and it's communicating. So the big exciting deal is that it is your largest sensory organ, and it's the feeling to your fingertips, to your skin. And it's not just a story of when I do that, a nerve sends a signal up into my brain and neuron fires, and then it doesn't work like that. The whole thing, your whole architecture is basically a living antenna. So when we talk about our instinct and we talk about our intuition and we talk about our awareness and our feelings and, oh, that person gave me the creeps, or, oh, I get a really good feeling when I look at her, your whole system is actually calibrating that sensory awareness of that person's resonance field, actually. So what it makes us is a kind of instrument, and I can describe a bit more of that later if you want me to, but it makes each of us a kind of a tuned instrument when we understand how that architecture forms. And this is the thing that makes me laugh. Hundreds of years ago, René Descartes, who was considered the father of modern medicine, the father of modern science, he needed to get sanction to dissect human bodies, which was illegal under the church, and most not always, some people managed to do it, but generally speaking, and I'm passing over, we could spend an hour just talking about the history of fascia. It's fascinating. But basically René Descartes did a turf deal with the Pope, and the deal was he could take bodies to dissect them if the church held jurisdiction over the soul, the spirit, the mind, and the emotions, so the invisible forces. So what happened was science, that rift entered Western science, and the body was studied as if it was separate from the being that inhabits it. We're not a body that goes around looking for a soul or a spirit or an animus to animate us. And this isn't a religious conversation in any way. That isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what makes me, me, and what makes you, you. And it's not just our features, which of course are unique to us. It's our resonance, it's our personality, it's our unique archetypes, it's our patterns of being, yeah? And this pattern, although it's similar in that we've both got 2 hands, 2 feet, hopefully 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose and a mouth, the pattern is our species specific pattern. But the expression of that pattern is completely unique to all of us. And it's almost as if science went down the route of divorcing the body from the being and cutting it up into parts that got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And somewhere down the line, we forgot to put it back together again. And I'm working with some of the most fascinating people in the world. I mean, I can't tell you, they're amazing. And I'm not listing them. I'm not avoiding it. We can put a piece out after this podcast if people want more names. But I'm just about to go to the Biotensivity Interest Group, where we talk about how that architecture works. And Dr. Stephen Levin is the kind of, we call him the father of that. But the people there, Graham Scarr and Leonid Blyum and John Sharkey, and lots of leading anatomists, and there's all kind, Jaap van der Waal and Jean-Claude Gamberteau, they're all very famous protagonists in the field, but one of them has changed the way we see the fascia, and medically it's beginning to get into medical training and science, is Jean-Claude Gamberteau, who's a hand surgeon in France, and he took an endoscope under the skin at the wrist where he was doing his operations and saw the fascial matrix under the skin as a living web, connected everywhere to everything, no layers, just wholeness, but everything under tension. And so suddenly we've got these visuals and these measuring tools that can show us everything from a completely different point of view. And it's literally shaking the whole paradigm, because it means when we talk about the arm being a lever and how much strength we need to do this, there are no levers in living forms. We're non-linear. There's no levers in non-linear biologic forms anywhere, ever. So suddenly this new view of anatomy that brings in the fascia, which has always been there, it's nothing new, but the understanding of how it animates form, it makes muscles work, it joins everything together, its connectedness, its communion into this wholeness of architecture, suddenly changes the laboratory where you're doing human dissection into it, changes it into it's more like a monastery. I mean, it's just like, I mean, far be it from me to call anything that's scientific anything to do with the church, but if there's anything mysterious about the human beings that we've lost through Western anatomy, I think it's separating us into these parts as if we could learn about each of the parts and it makes sense of the whole, and we've kind of forgotten to put it back together again. So ever since that happened 400 years ago, what we're left with now is anatomy books full of the kind of bags of watch parts. And it's like me handing you a bag of watch parts and a list of what they are and what they do, and then a sort of list of instructions, but nobody really knows how we reproduce and self-assemble and how the embryo differentiates. It's still a huge mystery, really. I mean, we've got better and better ideas, but really? And we put that mystery aside as if it doesn't count, and we hand ourselves these watch parts as if they're going to tell the time, and they're not, because there's this massive chasm between naming each one of these body parts and functions and understanding essentially how they all come together as a whole. And its wholeness, its connectedness, is a function of the fascial matrix. So that matrix holds your guts in place, it holds your nerves in place, it holds your vessels, all your blood vessels in place, your bones are held in place. Everything is connected, held together and held apart, distinguished by the membranes of the fascia. So suddenly it's all different. And so what happens is you suddenly realize the whole body was always united from the moment it was conceived, animated by something we can't explain, and it never was any different. You're always whole. So the first step to happiness hacking, in my experience, and I get to teach teachers a lot rather than lay people, but the first class, everyone's moved to tears, because we suddenly realize from a point of view of what's wrong with me, oh, my finger hurts, or what's wrong with me, my lungs aren't doing what I want, or what's wrong with me, my kidneys aren't behaving. You suddenly get told or realize, or, and this is the key, recognize, a cog. They're not separate cogs. We recognize, we put together our wholeness. And when somebody says, actually, you are whole and complete, right now, you are whole and complete, united by your natural intelligence of your fascial matrix, which is a living sensory organ that brought you into being. You self-assembled. You actually already know what to do. Everybody just goes, you're kidding me. I mean, doesn't it? It moves you. And what, yeah. It's moving because, and guess what starts the whole thing? Guess which cells start the whole thing and never separate, never, ever separate from the whole body? Guess, what would you love it to be?
I'd love it to be the heart.
You bet. You bet. What else? The cardiac cells start beating in this little place above the crown, and it animates the formation of the brain.
My fascia's going now. It's like
your whole body's glowing, right?
Yeah.
It falls down in front of you and it kind of waits while the sides come round. And then this thing called the septum transversum, which is going to be your diaphragm, comes from the front and meets the back. And meanwhile, the brain and the spine are growing down the back and they meet there. And then the lower part comes down and wraps around. So the whole thing is a Mobius strip in the round. It's not two-dimensional or three-dimensional, it's multi-dimensional. If I say four-dimensional, people start arguing, but it's multi-dimensional. It's in the round, and it's not rocket science. We're rounded, everything. Look, there's no levers, none. Everything happens in the round. And so anything you do to the front of you, you do to the back of you, because you're all one piece. And in this day and age, the next happiness hack, if we've got one, we find out that we are whole and complete. The second one, we find out we're heart-centered. We're not brain-centered, we're heart-centered. Heart first. Heart grows brain, not the other way around. Heart grows brain. So we're whole and complete, we're heart-centered, but we're a community. We are a collective. And the vibrancy and the resonance of this field that this fascial matrix forms is a communication system. It's a signaling system. It's an intelligent motion detector. It's a sensory awareness that you can feel when you've got an eyelash on the edge of your eye that hasn't gone in yet. How do you explain that exquisite sensitivity with levers and muscles attached to bones? By the way, muscles are attached everywhere. So if there's anyone out there who's studying anatomy who knows the origin and the insertion of the muscle, very interesting. It's just a little bit more dense there, but there's no such thing as a muscle connecting to a bone. It's a fascial matrix wrapping around a fascial matrix. Muscles are connected everywhere. There's not one bit of anything that isn't connected to everything in the whole body. And it's changing how we teach movement. It's changing how we teach everything, frankly. And you can't just walk in and change how you do medical work, but it's changing how people are cut. We already know that cutting the body is not the ideal, and it's done much more carefully. You know, years ago, for example, a C-section was done from the navel to the pubis, and now it's done across an area at the base of rectus abdominis, which is a tiny place where the transverse abdominis and a little muscle called pyramidalis, where they have a kind of line anyway. So everything's done much more thoughtfully, but it's not just because it's a better idea. It actually minimizes the damage to the direction of the fibers, which then minimizes scar tissue, which is another whole great big subject.
So with the fascia, you know, once the fascia is cut and that's healing, would that scar tissue have an impact on your skeleton, on your bad backs, on
everything? So imagine you're looking
where they would have just taken it out before and thrown it in the bin. That would have been quite a big healing zone, wouldn't it? And then probably impacted on how your whole structure sits.
It's the work on scar tissue. It's a separate subject, and it's a huge subject. But just imagine this. Do this with me. It's really simple. Imagine you've got a tennis net across a tennis court, yeah? And it's hanging, it's beautifully tensioned across the top. And so the net is hanging exactly the right amount above the ground so that a ball from one side can't roll under it, but it's kind of stopped by the net, and you're looking at that net. And you notice as you're looking at that net that it goes up in the middle. So you wouldn't do this, but if you went over to the net and just kept pulling to get it longer and stretch it, That's one way of trying to get that quink out the net. If you looked all over the whole net and you found that there was a knot in the net, yeah, and you went and you managed to undo the knot, you haven't touched the space where the shape's gone wonky. You've undone the knot. So then the whole thing can hang. And surgery has to have an effect. Now, I'm not criticizing surgery for a minute. It saved my life and it saved my father's life, and I'm bowing. However, one of the reasons that surgeons are so careful, and something that cannot be avoided when they're in the business of saving lives, is surgical scar tissue. It's impossible, because this is made in one piece. This is made in the round. I mean, I cut my finger. I don't think you can even see it. Can you see it? There's a little tiny cut on my finger the other day. I sliced it with a knife, like an idiot. And of course, it's formed a scar tissue, and I want it to. For goodness sake, I need it to act as a finger. I'm a body worker. I need to be able to do that without my fingers falling apart. But of course, it has to form a scar tissue. But what I know to do is to keep that scar tissue moving so that it doesn't go hard and solid and cause me a problem. So back to the body, depending on where it is and why it is, and also there does tend to be emotional stuff caught up in it, because that's the next bit about the fascia I want to talk about, is that scar tissue has to have an effect somewhere else. It's not necessarily bad, but when you understand what it is, you can start making a difference to how it affects you. You can have, we do a lot of soft tissue work that actually releases scar tissue, because what happens is the body gets into, oh my God, there's an accident, nino, and all the emergency cells come in and start adding different kinds of fascial fibers. There's all different types. And they add something called elastin, which is part of the wound healing process, so that when there's a cut open, the elastin is animated to cover the area and act as a bed, we think. I mean, I'm oversimplifying this, but it makes sense. Because if you think about it, when you graze a knee, it's a bit of a mess, but then this mesh kind of forms, including the blood, which is connective tissue, and it sets in a scab. And you want it to do that, because that process of hardening is what makes us whole again. However, just like if I took my shirt now and I made a cut in it and I stitched it back up again, there would be a scar. There would be a darn in the sock. And if you think about how the darn in a sock feels and how it changes the quality of the rest of the sock and the elasticity of the rest of the sock, you get an idea what happens around a scar. And it's inevitable.
So on a physical level, we can see that, can't we? When we've had an accident, or we've gone under the knife and we've had surgery or whatever, there's a physical representation of that, and it has an impact on one way or another. So what was really interesting, the bit that I was like, oh my gosh, that's really the sensory aspect to it on an energetic level. When we're in trauma, or we've had some kind of whether traumatic childhood, or any kind of argument, or our senses, if we're sensing on all of that level, we're all empathic then, which was always something that I kind of thought we were anyway. We're soaking all of that energy in. The impact on an energetic level or on a sensory level crystallizes in an area. The
great word. It's a great word, Patricia, and I'm listening to you and thinking, where do I start? Yes, basically, but what I don't want to do here is go all woo woo and because I'm not a psychotherapist, but we are in the world of fascia. Fascia is divided. The sense is called proprioception. Proprio comes from the Latin one's own, and seption comes from perception. So proprioception means one's own sense of oneself. And basically what proprioception accounts for is our sense of where we are in space. So I know I'm sitting in a chair, so my spine knows I'm sitting in a chair, and I can lean back, and you can see that I'm leaning back in my chair. Just, you can see me, because my entire energy is in the chair. And when I'm sitting up straight, even though you can see the chair, you can actually tell the difference that I'm sitting up. I'm animated in a different way to when I'm like that. And you're reading that on multi-sensory levels. Okay. So the proprioception is then divided into interoception and exteroception, which is really complex because everybody has a different interpretation of which is which. But technically, interoception means the feeling of it internally, and exteroception is more of a relation to what's outside. And in actual fact, if you think of us as a bag of a walking resonance field, you are constantly a conduit and a responder to what and who is around you. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a biomechanics lesson now, because we can't go any further without me saying, what we understand is that when the embryo grows itself, when I grew me and you grew you and everyone watching this podcast grew themselves, the tissue that was going to become bone, which in an embryo is cartilage, it's not had any forces put through it yet, so it's still soft. But basically, this is a soft matter thing. Your soft matter, all of you, even your bones. There's hard soft matter, which is the bones, the hardest we have, or the teeth could be the hardest soft matter. I'm not sure which is the hardest, the teeth or the bones. And there's soft matter. So the softest of your matter would be your saliva, or the mucus in your body is very, very soft. And you know it can harden. And so we're on a range of softness to stiffness, we call it. Now, that's not stiffness like bad stiffness, like, oh, my shoulder's stiff. That's not what we mean. We mean you need your bones to be fairly stiffened inside this bag of skin. But here's the thing. The bones grow about 8 times faster than the soft tissues around them. So they form like a catapult, dragging the tissues with them so that they're under tension. So when the embryo forms, this little limb bud grows out and brings the tissues with it. But it's under tension. Like, imagine a marquee. All the fabric is tensioned, yeah? And the guy wires tension it. Well, that, or a spider's web, the frame's on the outside, but the web is tensioned, so it resonates. So if you think of the strings of a harp, they're tensioned between a frame. Frame's on the outside, strings are on the inside. We have our frame on the inside, strings are on the outside. So the bones bolt through the tissue and take them with, and then we start moving and using our bodies, and that dictates what hardens when, through the forces moving through it. So a little baby, a 2, 3, 4-year-old, doesn't have a fully formed pelvis. They have a fully formed cartilaginous ring that's potentially going to become a pelvis. But when they start moving and running and climbing and doing stuff over years, not weeks, not months, but years, they harden that pelvis into the ring that we have, that we recognize, and we go on hardening it. And of course, it then, as we get older, it gets harder and harder, but it also, we become more naturally dehydrated, and then it becomes more brittle. So the qualities that we talked about of the building materials are changing throughout our lives. As a whole, this whole bag of all these qualities, and I mean, the more you learn about it, the more miraculous it is, which is why I said the laboratory feels like a monastery, because the more you learn, you're just sitting there going, I don't believe that. I don't believe what I'm seeing. I don't believe, I mean, the diaphragm, we think of the diaphragm as a muscle. It's a membrane. It has muscle in it, but it's a membrane with muscle protein in it. It's a membrane. And I've seen a diaphragm so thin, it's like 3 pieces of cling film thick. I mean, and you're just thinking, how the hell did that breathe that person alive for 80 something years? And then you think, oh my God, what's in here? Well, guess what? A membrane that does this in the round, from front to back, from side to side, up and down, all day long. And you can't stop it. And if that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. So, you know, as much as I'm trying to make the science straight, for me, you can't divorce the amazement, the awe. Emotion is awe. The emotion is awe. You cannot divorce the awe of understanding how this whole thing syncopates, and realizing that every aspect of your body is like an aspect of an orchestra. And you know, Leonardo da Vinci dissected the windpipe and created an instrument that copied how the human windpipe works. And you're everything's strung, but it's tensioned. Now, if you put a harp at one end of the room and a harp at the other end of the room, the same type of harp and the same tuning, and you pluck a chord at one end of the room, the harp at the other end will resonate to the same chord. Now, tell me that you can't do that with me over this airways. Tell me that you don't do that with your children, your family, your person at a bus stop. You get on the bus and the weirdo comes and sits next to you and you think, look, that is your strong resonance. I mean, it's not even rocket science. It's, stay there, I'm going to get you a model. This is a model of, it's called a tensegrity model. And what it is a model of how the strings are tensioned in such a way, they are organized in such a specific pattern that the struts, these are called, don't touch each other. Can you see they're floating?
Yeah.
And the person who made one of these, this is a copy of it, Graham Scarr made this one, was Kenneth Snelson, an artist who lived in New York, and he was a student of Buckminster Fuller, an architect. And he called this, Kenneth Snelson, and I spoke to him before he died, an amazing, amazing man, amazing man. And he created one of these, which is in the Smithsonian Museum in New York. It's outside, and it's called Snelson's Needle Tower. And this is a baby Snelson's Needle Tower. But the reason it's so important is that you can hold it anywhere, in any direction, and nothing falls off. And can you see the Star of David?
Yeah. Sacred geometry.
There she goes. Ha! So that is a map of the forces between the cells. People think it's a map of the bones in the body. It's a symbol of the bones in the body. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But this is actually a map of the forces between the cells. And so every cell is connected because it's close packed. And so what this means is, if you imagine that this had a sleeve around it, if I put the sleeve of my jumper over the top of this and I stretched it, yeah?
Yeah.
Now you have fabric that is also tensioned. Well, imagine that's your skin. And basically, this is a moment in time in your body. This is moving all the time. This is resonating all the time because you're alive, because you're breathing, because your heart's beating, because your pulse is moving. And look, they're communicating. And if you imagine that you are made up of millions of these, of all different sizes and shapes, different lengths and tensions, you are literally an orchestra of different instruments, strung and tensioned towards each other and away. And this could be a cell with a nucleus inside the cell. But Graham's a genius making these. But what they're showing is that everything is created in the human body based on these two forces, which are tension and compression. And even this one, which I love, which has a spiral dynamic to it, because that's how the gut tube works. The fascia spirals around everything. And so that's how we breathe, because everything in us is tensioned. So everything, we spiral into form, every muscle is spiraled, everything's spiraled, because the fascia wraps one way and then wraps the other way, and then that architecture can move. So it's like every tube in your body is basically a wrapping in one direction and a wrapping in the other direction. And incidentally, when you cut a tree and you look at the circles of a tree, every single one of those is a spiral going one way and a spiral going the other way. And every year, if it's a straight tree, the ring forms spiraling the opposite to the year before. And that's how you get a straight tree. When you get a twisted tree, like a twisted willow, it's because the spirals go the same way for a couple of years or 3 years or 4 years, and then they go the other way. So what we're looking at is not a new idea. It's so ancient. It's so basic to living things. And as you see this one moving, the slightest movement I make, it responds. Now, the way we learn biomechanics is crazy, because we have a spinal column. Well, a column is a structure in a house that's a compression structure. Everything's stacked on everything. And if you tilt a column, the whole lot comes down. But when I do that, my head doesn't fall off. When I do that, my hand doesn't fall off my arm, because it's held in place by one piece. It's one piece like this. So the whole of us is communicating all the time. So back to our happiness hack number 1, we're whole and complete. We are heart-centered, and we are resonance fields. We're instruments. We're living instruments. And it just fascinates me. And then what happens, and this comes back to what you said about crystallizing in the scar tissue, this is actually a liquid crystal matrix. Another whole thing. I won't go into it, but basically the body is a living liquid crystal matrix. And that doesn't mean it's liquid like water. It's liquid like egg white. Yeah. And guess what an egg is? It's a liquid crystal. So we are just different hardnesses and thicknesses and densities and expressions of this liquid crystal matrix. So when we understand that, we understand a range of qualities. And we realize that everything's on a spectrum, from hardness to softness, from straightness to curvedness, from hydration to dehydration. Like with me to the tree, I've got a huge tree outside my window, is from mobility to stability. So what we've got is this range. And when you start thinking about the fascia as a matrix in you, you actually realize you already know that. Emotionally, you can be absolutely up in the sky furious with somebody 1 minute, and then you can sort out what the problem was and the misunderstanding as if it was a knot in the net. And then you go, oh, and you undo the knot in the net, and everything calms right down again. And you're like, oh, we're all calm now. And we have this ability to variably become responsive. And then we start realizing that's all we are, is responsive. And then what happens is we become responsible, able to respond. We recognize our responsibility. And then you start realizing that I self-assembled this. I am self-contained. I am self-motivated. I am self-aware. And it starts changing the rules, because you realize you can create joy or you can create sadness. It depends which environment you generate in your resonance field. And I know some people are in circumstances, don't get me wrong, where the idea of generating joy is beyond anything. But human beings are extraordinary. And there are stories of where people have, I mean, you know, we thrive on those stories of people like Helen Keller, who were deaf, dumb and blind, but found her way to make a difference in the world. And I'm not being glib about that. You just saw me mess up my timetable. None of us are perfect. We are human. We are resonance field that play good music and bad music, and sometimes we're tuned and sometimes we're not. And that leads me to the word harmony. And for me, if we can find some harmony in our environment, whatever it is, we actually have more power than I think we think to tune out of something that is negative, that is angry, that is difficult. Sometimes we can catch ourselves. We can become a little bit introspective for a moment, if you like. Just stop and think, what did I just say? And that brings us to some fascinating facts about the body and the fascia. Fascially, your tongue is continuous with your heart pericardium. Your pericardial sac becomes your tongue. It's one piece. I know that. I dissected it. It absolutely is one piece. And we're not taught that in school. We're not taught that at college. We're not taught that in, we're taught that this is a compartment, the cranial compartment, and this is the thorax, and this is the abdomen, and these are the limbs. We're taught as if it's all separate. It's not.
Oh, hang on. We lost you a little bit. Hello. Oh no. Where are you? Hello. Hi Joe, we're back again. Thank you.
You've frozen the picture. Oh no, you're back.
I'm back. Yay! Okay, so yeah, we had a bit of a technical thing there, but we're back. So you were talking about the tongue being connected to the heart.
So you kind of know when someone's speaking with their own voice. You know, I don't know if you watch X Factor, but when somebody sings from the heart and they are congruent, their mind, body, emotions, their body, their mind, their being, whatever you want to call it, is resonating in the same frequency. You can hear it. You're listening to it all the time. When you have a cat or a dog and they kind of seem to be communicating with you, you're working with resonance fields all the time. And one of the things that I think is, when I say press pause and prosper, it's remembering ourselves to ourselves as a kind of mysterious instrument that's actually aware. And if we just press pause, literally in the middle of a day doing nothing, or in the middle of a conversation, you can almost just go, hang on, what am I doing here now? And you just stop, feel your feet on the ground, or your tail on a seat, or your elbows on the table, or whatever it is, your hands on your desk, and just press pause and feel where you are. And in that moment, one of the most powerful exercises you can do is just place your tongue on the roof of your mouth. So you're breathing through your nose, and just feel the breath come in, and you feel it slightly cool at the tip of the nostrils, and you just bring it in like it's a gift, because you can't stop your breathing. You can't stop it. You can't put your hand over your mouth. So you just breathe in and just experience that breath coming in for seconds. This takes seconds. You can do it any moment. And just have it trickle through you, and imagine or ask, what's my resonance? What am I tuned to? And one of the things I've discovered for myself, and all the things I've read about, and you can imagine, I mean, this is actually the side of a bookcase that goes, there's miles of it. There's more books than you know what to do with in here. I live in a library, basically. Everything we read in the ancient mystery texts is about being still, being present, listening to the self, being present, be here now, Eckhart Tolle's work. But I don't think we realize it's like letting the instrument rest for a nanosecond and just retune. And one of the things we read about often, the little sayings we get on Instagram and Facebook and stuff about, it matters who you keep company with. And I think sometimes we find ourselves in a place of disharmony, not because somebody's a bad guy or somebody's a good guy, but because we're just not in a situation that's congruent for us, or we're not resonating. And it may not be possible. Sometimes you just got to get on with it. But there are moments when we can just stop wherever we are and just take a breath, press pause, and just think of this brilliant, intelligent architecture that knows where it is in space at any given time. And this heart-centered being that's self-assembled, I mean, that makes you pretty smart. And just feel that that is a blessing, a gift, a grace. And then you literally create a grace field. You can't do anything else. And you are emanating grace. And you can be selfish. You can be with a bunch of people you don't like and just keep it to yourself. But at least have it to here, to your immediate electromagnetic field, and feel that for yourself, And I'm not being selfish here. What I'm saying is, if you do that, you'll be absolutely amazed. You attract people. It's like a light goes on, and people want to be in that.
And you'll repel people. You'll repel the ones that don't resonate with that. So, if you are in that position in your environment or in your home life where it does not resonate with you, you're in a traumatic kind of scenario, whatever, you make this a daily practice, you will start seeing the changes in who falls away from your life and who you attract and bring in.
It's funny. I think you're right. And it's very hard. I mean, God knows, when you're a busy parent, you've got kids screaming and partners wanting what they want, and the house that's got something wrong with it, and nothing worked. When I say press pause, trust me, I know how hard it is to press pause. But if you can just, I mean, do it with me now. Let's do it now. Let's just take a lovely deep breath. And just close your eyes for a single minute. And feel where you are. Nothing else. And just in that moment, there, you're just being you now. And then when you open your eyes again, can you feel that? You're more in yourself.
Absolutely.
And what you just did was you just said to all the strings,
I just felt like I came home. I felt like I came home for a moment. It just all settled.
It is a signaling system. It signals instantly. It is so fast. It's faster than the nervous system as we traditionally know it. If you were on a fast motorbike and a fly was coming towards you, you'd blink before it hit your eye, even if you were doing 100 miles an hour. It is a matrix, a sensory organ that feels its way into form and feels its way through life. And when we already do that, we've just got to find new words and new language to explain it. But we've always done that. That is mankind. That is animal kind. That is every living thing does that. Every flower is sensitive to the light and it closes at night.
I suppose
that sensitivity is what we're talking about.
It's about bringing the awareness in that that's what we do. It's about bringing that awareness and that knowledge and the ability to then practice it on a daily basis, isn't it? And make that become experts in that slowly but surely.
Well, in a way, there's nothing to do. That's the funny part. Nothing becomes such treasure when you can just pause and do nothing. But what I think we don't realize is that pausing and doing nothing for a minute, 3 times a day, is more valuable than not stopping. You know, I sometimes go and I hit my bed and that's it. Like, those pauses are worth their weight in gold. And it you know, I know we have to finish now, but it goes into sports and how important rest time is between sporting events. It goes into the things we do with ourselves in a day. If we just reorganized it to give ourselves 5 minutes to just go like that.
It would be really good to bring that into the school day. You know, it'd be really great to have teachers and students have that minute or 2-minute pause, maybe before, during, or after a class. We don't need much. We just need a little slither, don't we? I love that. I love the letting all of those strings just. I'm having that as my visual for when I'm doing it. All of my strings just settle, and I really feel that coming home. So it'd be lovely to bring that into all the schools as well. Thank you so much, Jo. And yeah, Jo, it was amazing. So insightful. Yeah. We'll have to have you back so that we can expand further, because I know we've only just literally scratched.
Well, I've thrown in a lot of names. I don't know. I have to honour my teachers and colleagues that are just completely amazing. And, you know, I mentioned Leonid Blyam earlier. He works with children with cerebral palsy and his work is outstanding. And he makes such a difference because he understands this. And really, it's magical work. So it's called biotensegrity, by the way. This what I was doing with these. This is a tensegrity model, and our architecture is a biotensegrity organization. So very exciting new word. There's a lot of crap written around it. Yeah. People are kind of making it up as they go along about the fascia, and they're making it up as they go along about biotensegrity, and some people get it and some people don't. But
so anyone that's really interested in this, you run a course, don't you? You do a course.
Yeah, I teach yoga teachers, and I teach yoga teachers mainly because yoga is a form where we take time to rest, and we treat that as very important. And I really hope we can bring that into the medical services, into the schools. I know lots of schools are adopting these mindfulness practices, they're calling them, but basically from a physiological point of view, basically they're pressing pause. Yeah. And everyone prospers, everyone's calmer, Everyone is, I mean, the research in transcendental meditation, which is an aspect of yoga, is phenomenal. Just 20 minutes a day or twice a day of just sitting and being still. You are stilling your whole body, and that rest is like nourishment to the soul. I mean, it's just crazy the difference it makes. So I teach how this works and how it's applied to movement practices for yoga teachers and Pilates teachers and Bowen practitioners and all kinds of people, neuromuscular therapists and so on and so forth. And it's fascinating how it actually applies in practice. So mostly I teach teachers, but I'm just so excited about making it a bit more accessible to people, because
so people can find your book as well, Yoga, Fascia, Anatomy and Movement, and they can find that as well, can't they, online? And
that's written for yoga teachers, really, so it's a little bit academic, but watch this space, because there's stuff.
Book.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you mentioned sacred geometry, and that's actually the basis of how we form. And you know, we don't talk about the word sacred in the lab very much, but I mean, if this isn't awesome and sacred, and our children and everyone, and if we just remembered that, I mean, I have a dream, Patricia, just as I go, and this is my dream, that one day we could all just sit down on this beautiful planet, Mother Earth. Geometry means the measure of Mother Earth. Geo, Gaia, metri, meter. Meter is measure, meter is mother. Geo is Gaia, Gaia, matria. Geometry, the measure of Mother Earth. That we could all sit cross-legged for 1 minute around the whole world, on the planet, and just channel the radial force of gravity that's holding us all on at the same time, because we're on the upside down bit at the moment, but who cares, because gravity's pulling us all in, and we are exactly pulling ourselves away to the exact same amount that we're being pulled in. That's how we're sitting here. This is the translation of forces. It's already here. It's hidden in the obvious. And we are all sit down and just put our hands together and breathe the air and Mother Earth in gratitude and awe for 1 minute, the whole planet.
All at the same time. That would be amazing.
I'm telling you, so much drama would disappear.
Yeah, it would. We have to do a movement for it. We'll have to do a movement. Thank you so much, Jo. You can find out more about Joanne Avison at www.joanneavison.com. Is that right?
Yeah, it's being replaced. Watch this space. So
okay. And do you have a Facebook page?
I do. I have two. I have a business one with a black and white photograph, and I have my personal one. And yeah, I'm delighted to be in communication.
Brilliant. So if anyone wants to find out more or stay in touch with Joanne, then bounce over to her Facebook page and like it, and say hi. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you for your work. Thank you for your beautiful contribution. I mean, happiness hacks. What's better?
Yeah.
And just.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know I'm on a mission as well. Woohoo! All right, so thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Joanne. Hope to do this again soon and really expand on that kind of energy work as well, and that kind of universal consciousness that we're all connected with in terms of the fabric of our electromagnetic field.
Yeah, and we can look at why mindfulness works the way that it does, and it's so exciting.
Yeah, so please come back on again. That would be amazing. Thank you. Right, okay, so yeah, so thank you very much, and thank you for listening. I hope you've all loved this episode as much as we have, and I'll see you next week for another episode of the Happiness Hacker Reveals how to live a happier and more successful life. And so in the meantime, remember to press that pause button, remember to be present, be kind, and above all, be real. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.